Hey Saints, I just wanted to point this out, I guess, the Britain's exit vote to exit the EU, and many people are saying, that the stock markets are crashing and all this, and then many of the articles out there are saying this is a pushback against the New World Order. That's actually what this video snippet here was reporting on. This is the Next News Network. And they do they do some interesting stuff. They've been following the military buildup in Europe, especially around Russia, but then also the military buildup in the Middle East, and all the different factions in there. And they've been doing a pretty good job of that. And so this report they did this morning, they said something really interesting that rung a bell with me. They speculated that actually this was what was necessary from a New World Order perspective, because Britain was the only vote left in the EU that prevented, they're the only veto vote left in the EU that prevented the standing army from being created in the EU. And they claim that the buildup on the Russian border with all the NATO troops, had to include the exit of the British exit vote here, because then they can create that integrated standing army without a veto vote and NATO can take on Russia. And so they actually said that, this vote, just like many of us suspected, a lot of the votes here in the US and other places were engineered votes, too many anomalies, right? Well, this one was so hyped up and both sides were played. You think about the Hegelian dialectic, right? You play both sides, but it's a controlled opposition, and you have to create lots of fear and angst. And that way, when you come in with the new solution, everybody accepts it. And I think, we may be on the edge of something like that happening, because the Asian stocks were down, and you guys know your history. I mean, anytime there's global financial collapse, the threat of war always comes trotting out. You think about World War II, you think about what happened in Europe generating World War I and some of these things. So if there is this big economic collapse, it's yet one more justification for war to begin. And don't think, my opinion, don't think that this wasn't engineered to happen this way. The whole history of all the wars going, back through the US and the European wars, there was always an engineered trigger event. And that leaves you with the impression that, it was controlled opposition on both sides so that they could orchestrate some sort of outcome, and that's what this appears to be. But now the biblical part, because that's really what we care about on this channel. I'll just remind everybody, Daniel 2, the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar gets in his dream, and then Daniel comes and interprets it, and he's saying, the head of gold was Babylon, and the chest of silver and Medo-Persia, and then the brass was Greece and Alexander the Great, and then the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh into pieces, and subdue all things. And as iron that breaketh these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part iron and part clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou saw the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to one another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And then it says, in the days of these kings shall God set up a heaven, set up kingdom, God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left for other people, but it shall be break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. It shall stand forever. Well, there's the second coming. And you guys know that in 243 here, where there's the seed of men, but then there's the they that mingle themselves with the seed of men, and it's really curious. Now, just a few videos ago, I got into the Nephilim that appear to be there in the Gog-Magog war in Seal 4, and then we talked about them again coming from above, and here we've got the reference to something that's mingling themselves with the seed of men, but clearly they're not the seed of men. And so I really think that this standing EU army has to be formed as the basis of the final, Antichrist army. He needs that basis. And if you follow the New World Order's little scheme, the collapse of the current world empire based in the US has to happen for the phoenix to rise. And so I think the ordering of things is pretty obvious. As something will likely, maybe this is the trigger event with the British exit and then the collapse of the stock market triggering war. But we know from scripture here that the Seal 2, global unrest and war occurs. And, very likely that's where the U.S. is going to find itself in a little bit of trouble. And then if the Antichrist shows up and the phoenix, quote, rises, he needs his army. If the U.S. is devastated, we're still the world power, although our government's been doing a lot to try and undermine that. My thought here is that if something happens to the U.S. and Canada, and now England is on the sidelines too right after this, that would allow the EU then to finish and form the standing army, and Germany is at the head of that, which is kind of curious as well. So I think it's important, saints. Now, this is speaking of the fourth kingdom is the extension of the Roman Empire. As these kingdoms flowed in order, and then the Roman Empire is going to be mixed with something that isn't the seed of men. But I want to point out something that you'd have to go back quite a few videos ago to get this from my videos. I'm over here in Daniel 9, and this is the 70 weeks of Daniel, and what's important here is not only the reference to the last world empire being, that extension of the Roman Empire, but also who they follow and who they worship. And I don't know of anybody else that really calls this out, but I think it's important where we're at right now, saints. So in 926, after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. Well, that happened, at the death and resurrection of Jesus. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and sanctuary. Well, we know that happened in 70 AD, the Roman army. But the people of the prince, and we know that this is a reference, maybe no is a little bit of a strong, but he fits the description of the Antichrist, small p prince here. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. Now, here we see that, this prince is going to be involved in war right to the end. We know earlier in Daniel, he's described as, what's the description? He honors the fortresses, I think it is. You guys probably remember the the verse. Maybe that's in 11. I can't remember if it's Daniel 11 or like 7 or 8 there, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Is he's a warlike Antichrist. And matter of fact, he doesn't honor the gods of his fathers. He honors the god of fortresses and a strange god. So he needs the army. That's the long story short. And it's the people of the prince. And we know from Scripture that this Antichrist prince is given power from Satan himself. And so the key thing isn't so much that he's the head of the Roman army, because I think this is going to end up being a global system. He's the people that are there, that are referenced. The Romans back in the back in the time of this writing didn't exist, but when the Roman Empire came to be, it was the Babylonian system that was in control of the Romans, right? It was the descending Babylonian system that came through all these different people groups. Now, the Romans worshiped the Titans and the gods, but if you go back, that's probably from the mythology of the Titans and the gods, the fallen angels that were, and the watchers that were to rule over men, and what they did with the daughters of women from Genesis 6. And so the key thing is, it's the extension of the Roman army is what needs to get formed, but the people of the prince, just like the Messiah is our prince. Now, he was Jewish, but that doesn't make me Jewish. I think this is going to be a global system, and the identifier of the people of that prince will be those that follow after the Antichrist, who is endued with power from Satan. And people don't get that out of that passage as much as they just focus on, well, that prince has to come from the EU. And I think maybe, but then maybe not, because in other places in the Old Testament, he's called the Assyrian. And we know Nimrod, his original cities were up there in, Babylon and upper Mesopotamia. So it wouldn't shock me. And we know likely he's going to be Nephilim or a mixed DNA himself. And so we know likely that he's going to appear, and I very much think he could be part of that whole alien deception. So, what if this Brexit thing is the trigger event for financial collapse, and then that's used as the excuse for the military conflict to begin? And what is the little storyline of all the UFOologists that so much want to see them come? It's that they're going to save the world, and there's the storyline that they're going to appear when we're about to kill the whole planet off because of nuclear war. I just think that storyline sort of fits the biblical storyline that the church, maybe today, folks, the church is about to exit, and then you see England being set aside. The formation of the EU army is immediately enabled. The NATO armies are already looped around Russia, so the start of that war would seem obvious. China, we've been poking them, and they've been poking back against all of the other partners there in the Asian South China Sea area. Philippines and Vietnam and all those are aligning with the U.S. against China. So you can see the global conflict that's on the horizon as well, and then not to even speak of Syria and what's going on down there. So I don't know, Saints, I'd really be looking up right now. I'm not saying that this has to be the trigger event, but it sure could be. And in the Gog-Magog war in Ezekiel 38, we know that um, well, most people think it's England. Let's go take a look at that. Here it is in verse 13. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee, Art thou come up to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered by the company to take a prey and to carry away silver, gold, to take away cattle, goods, and take a great spoil? So by the time you get to Ezekiel 38, 39 war, who's on the sidelines here? They're just complaining. Very likely it's, England, British Empire, because you got the young lions thereof, including the U.S. and Canada and Australia. So with the with the British folks exiting the EU, that sets them aside. And if the U.S. being the superpower has to also get set aside for the rise of the phoenix, you could see how this part would come to pass very quickly. Now, I think this is seal 4. I think Ezekiel 38, 39 is seal 4. We already took a look at seal 4 and the Therion reference in seal 4. Again, I think it's very likely that that's a reference to the Nephilim, just like I think that the passage we read in Daniel 2:43 there, where it said they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. So you can really see how this could come together. Now, again, if the Brexit thing isn't the trigger, fine, we're here for a while, but I would say look up, Saints. This could be it. God bless.